Good morning, or afternoon, or midday. How is everyone today? Oh, good, I'm glad you're excited. Me too. I love playing with clouds. They're so much fun. We'll be getting started in just a few minutes. I'm just kind of picking out some colors I want to use, so you can go ahead and get whatever colors you want. I'm going to be probably doing some different blues. I will be adding in some oranges and yellows and maybe some magentas. And we'll do a bunch of different clouds today. Oh, good, good. I'm glad that you're here. I am just searching through my watercolors are getting pretty used up. I'm going to have to get some new ones soon. I'm trying to find my quinacridone magenta because it's my favorite one. Here it is. Yeah, that one's getting pretty low. And then I think for the yellows that I'm going to put in here, I like to use the yellow ochres. So I might use a few more than this, but this is what I'm going to have to at least start with. I've got, this is a quinacridone magenta, a yellow ochre, and then I'm going to do two different blues, both a Prussian and a cerulean. I like to use two different blues to mix up my sky colors, and then I have an orange as well. I'll go over all that too when I actually start teaching, but just in case you're trying to get prepped. Looks like it's going to be another hot, toasty day in Colorado here. How's everybody's weather where you're at? We seem to be having much warmer weather than we normally do at this time of the year. We just have one more minute before we get started. I will be taping down some with you, but I already did prep a few here. And sorry, off camera I am knocking things over, which is probably loud and unpleasant. 75 in Morro Bay. Oh, that sounds nice. My grandparents used to go to Morro Bay every single year because they grew up right around that area. And so every year in the winter they would go for a month or so. I could go for a 75-degree day here. We've been 95 or so every single day, plus tons of pollen, so I apologize if I end up sounding kind of snuffly. My allergies have decided that this is the time to really act up. Horrible hot and humid in Texas. Ooh. We thankfully don't have too much humidity here because, yeah, the humidity can make it so much worse. All right, it's 11 a.m., so we're going to get started. If you are new here, my name is Lacey, and I am the artist behind Rebel Unicorn Crafts. We do a live watercolor class every Saturday at 11 a.m. Mountain Time, which is, I believe, 10 a.m. on the Pacific and 1 on East Coast. So I don't know where you're joining from, but this is the typical time of the class. Today we're going to be talking about clouds, and just in case you want to know a few things about me, you can. I love to see your pictures at the end of these, and I found that the easiest way, I mean, you can make a video, please do, but the other easy way is you can send me pictures at either Lacey Walker Art or Lacey Walker Art or Rebel Unicorn Crafts on Instagram. Ooh, Palm Springs. Yeah, I've heard it gets real hot there. So we're going to be doing a bunch of different clouds today. Some I will probably even do some more that aren't featured here, but just to kind of show you, we'll do just some general lifting of clouds. We'll also do some of these kind of swoopy ones, which are kind of fun to show. What are those called? Cirrus clouds? Or are those, what are the real high wind sweeping clouds called? Then we'll do some ones that maybe have some reflective parts to them, as if the sunset is just starting and just kind of hitting it, and then maybe a little darker. And then we might even do some stormy ones. So go ahead and get your pieces of paper. I'm going to be working on a few different sizes. I will probably set up about 7 paintings. You don't have to do all of them, but I like to be able to show a whole bunch of them, and then it enables me to teach as I go and let them dry without having to subject you to the hairdryer. If you are working and I talk about making sure something is dry before moving on and it's not dry yet, you can use a hairdryer to quickly dry that layer. So I've got these sizes. This is a little 3x4, 3x4, and this is a 4x5. And then I've got some other 3x3s and 3x4s. Go ahead and tape these down to your work surface. I like to tape mine down because then we can actually control the angle that we hold these at, so we can have better control over the water and make gravity work for us instead of against us. And I'm just using a masking tape. This is just a knockoff masking tape. It's kind of whatever the cheapest one that I could find was. And I'm just going to tape these down, and the more careful you are about how you tape these down, so be a little more careful than I am, the nicer you'll get those crisp lines at the end. I get impatient while I'm taping down during class because I want to get started and teach you guys, but feel free to take your time taping yours down. If at any point during class you've got questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. I do try my best to keep an eye on it. Sometimes I can't answer them right away, but I'm happy to answer questions as you go along and try to virtually troubleshoot. Sometimes it's a little hard without being able to see what you're doing, but I do my best. So let me know if you've got questions. And if I have missed a question, there's a chance maybe I just didn't see it, so feel free to ask again too. Now during this class, I will tell you how I mix up all my colors. You're totally welcome to change the colors to suit your desires of what you'd like to create. I will be talking a little bit about matching opacity though, because we want to maybe match the transparency in order for the techniques to work as well. But in general, you'll be able to do whatever colors you want. Alright, I've got these ones taped down, and I've got my other ones taped down too. So let's actually start by mixing up some colors. I have a little Deep Well palette that I really like to use. Sometimes these are called muffin tin palettes, and I like to use this one, I don't know, because it's a little bit smaller than some of my bigger ones, but I still have mixing space up here, and then I've got these nice deep wells so I can actually mix up a bunch of color if I want to use the same color across a bunch of things. So I'm going to start by mixing up a blue, and you either want to have, the other things we want to have, sorry, let me go over this, is we want a palette, we want our paper taped down. I'm going to be using a round brush. This one's a size 10. It reminds me more of a size 12 from other ones, but any sort of a size 10, 12 round brush will work, or you can use whatever brushes you have, but I will be using this one. We're going to want a rag to wash and dry our brush on, as well as we're going to want some paper towels. Part of what we're going to be lifting today, we're going to be using paper towels to do that. So make sure that you have a few of these sitting off to the side so that you don't need a ton. I probably will only be using about this much of the paper towel for the lifting part of this, because we can tear off little pieces. But I always set aside one of these just so that I don't saturate it on accident while I'm washing my brush and things like that. We're also going to want 2 cups of water, and that's so that we can wash our brush in one, and if you're using something like a pipette to actually transfer water, this will be helpful in order to make sure that you have nice clean water to mix up your colors with. You can, if you don't have 2 cups and you don't have a pipette, you can also use something like a spray bottle to transfer the water. That will work as well. But we're going to start by, I'm going to actually mix up quite a bit of blue because I've got quite a few little paintings here. So I'm going to put about 2 pipettes worth of water in one, and I'm going to actually mix up my blue with that. The other thing you want to grab is a scrap piece of paper, maybe the back side of one that didn't work out so well, so we can actually test our colors as we go. I'm using tube paints today, but you can also use dried pan paints. And I'm putting on some cerulean and some Prussian blue. In just a second, I'm going to turn off all my notifications so we don't have to hear that the whole time. Apparently Apple News really wanted me to know something. Alright, so we've got those. I'm going to start by just grabbing a little bit of both that Prussian and that cerulean blue, and I'm going to mix this right into this well here. You really want to get your brush down and around in there and really mix this together to make sure that the pigment isn't just stuck in your brush. And then here's why we always test. If you've been to my classes, you've heard me say this quite a few times, but we always test because this looks deceivingly blue in here, and then when we actually put it on the paper, it's hardly blue at all. So we need to keep adding a little more pigment. For clouds, in general, I'm going to want a slightly darker blue than I normally would for my skies because we're going to be lifting off a lot of the pigment, and having higher contrast is going to make our clouds stand out more. This is probably still going to be too light. So let's keep adding. I like to add in little bits at a time because it helps me kind of slowly control the color rather than jumping in and going too far too fast, because it's much harder to take out pigment than it is to add it. We're getting closer. I'm going to add maybe the rest of that Prussian blue. How much you need to add is going to depend on how much water you put in here. I put in quite a bit of water, so I might even need to add a little more to my palette. I'm going to add just a little bit more. And the other thing I'm personally going to do, you don't have to do this if you like really bright blues, not blight, is you can use orange to mute the color because it's on the opposite side of the color wheel, and you don't need much at all. So I'm just going to put a teeny tiny bit on my palette. And once I get my blue to about the saturation level that I want it to be, I'm going to take just the tip of my brush and just take a little bit of this and mix it in here. And it's going to have just kind of a nice subtle muting effect to it. Actually, I didn't probably put enough in. Let's do a little bit more. I don't want it to be too much, but I like to mute my blues just because they seem a little bit more true to actually skies. And so that's the color I'm going to be using. Hello and welcome. So I don't typically do reference photos for a lot of these little landscapes. We're going to just kind of go with our imagination here. All right, so again, you can mix up whatever color you want. Go ahead and get your blue, but you want to match my opacity, which basically means that you want the same level of transparency in the paint or how much water is in it, so that if you were to write hello on a piece of paper like this, and then cover it with your paint, that you'd be able to see it at about the same level as I'm seeing mine. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do, mix up our blue, and then I'm going to set this off to the side a little bit, because we're going to start with a nice sky first. Initially, we're going to be doing a flat wash, and then in order to lift those clouds, we're going to be using paper towels. So we want to prep our paper towels for this. So I'm going to take my paper towel here, and I'm going to kind of scrunch it up, and then I'm going to actually tear this. I'm going to tear this to kind of reveal the natural fibers, and the more you kind of scrunch this up to be a little bit more organic looking, the better your clouds are going to be. You can press with the sides here, But, you know, this is brawny paper towels, and if I were to actually push that on there, I would get the brawny symbol on, and, you know, some of these patterns could be kind of cool in the background, but in general, if we're trying to make clouds, we want them to be really kind of natural looking, so I like to go ahead and just have a piece of this ready to go. So I'm going to set that to the side and have it kind of right in grabbing range. You could hold it, or you can just set it to the side like I'm doing. Then the first thing we're going to do is just do a flat wash. Now you can do whichever method you like to do. I personally like to do the drip line method, where I take my brush, and this is a round brush, and I saturate it with the water and the color, and then using the tapered tip of the brush, I'm going to line that up, holding my paper up, and I'm going to make one horizontal stroke across and make sure that that is kind of falling, and you can see where that drip line falls. I'm going to grab a little more pigment, and I'm going to make another horizontal stripe where I just touch just that drip line and pull that down. I'm going to continue to add more and more as I go down, and then once I get to the bottom, I'm going to dry my brush off really quickly on my paper towel. And I'm going to suck up that extra moisture here. I'm getting a little pulling away, which I think I touched the sides a little bit too much, but that's okay because we're going to be adding clouds. So now I'm going to take my ripped side, and while this is still nice and wet, I'm just going to start lifting those clouds out. And I can change kind of the direction that I pull these. And then once this gets saturated, I can just rip off a little bit of that here to lift out a little bit more. Some colors are a little bit more staining than others. If I want to lift even more out, I'm going to wash my brush off and then slightly dry it off so that it's just damp, and then I'm going to touch in just a couple areas. Sometimes this is nice to add in some kind of extra highlights to really make these a little more dimensional. And then again, where I added that water, I'm just going to take my paper towel and grab a little bit more. And now we're just going to let this kind of do its thing. If you've got any extra water at the bottom, you can go ahead and pull this up. So you probably noticed on my painting that I was getting some kind of separation between the tape and the paper, where it was kind of pulling apart and it would have been a really uneven wash. And sometimes if you're painting a landscape and that happens, clouds are a great way to disguise that. So you can use clouds to also help you hide any mistakes that are happening. Plus, I think clouds just really add something to these paintings. Alright, I'm going to show you basically the same thing, but a slightly different way to do this on this bottom one here. I need to get my paper towel a little bit more visible, because rather than using the paper towel, you can actually do this same or similar method using your brush. I personally like the shapes that the paper towel makes, so this is usually my preferred method, but I want to give you another option. So on this bottom one, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to do that drip line technique, where I'm going to load up my brush, and I don't want to drip that huge drop of water on, so I'm going to kind of drip some of that off. Horizontal stripe across, grab the drip line and pull it down, and continue this all the way to the bottom. And all the way down. Then quickly, I'm going to grab that excess water by drying my brush off. And then, before this dries, I'm going to wash my brush off, tap it off just a little bit, and then it's going to be a damp brush here, where I can actually start to lift out some of these clouds. And I'm just going to lift and then wipe my brush off. Oh, we got a little puppy hair there. wants to join us for the class. And you can make these whatever shape you want. Now, one added benefit of doing it this way is that we can kind of encourage some of those back runs, because as this starts to dry in different areas, it's going to kind of concentrate the colors on the outer edges, which can be really nice for emphasizing the outer parts of clouds, or even the bottom, maybe to kind of have thunderhead type things. And I'm just going to keep doing this until I am happy with how my clouds look. Again, I can just alternate between washing my brush off and tapping it so that it's just damp. We don't want to put a whole bunch of water on here. We just want to put a little bit just to kind of pull some of this off. And most clouds have kind of a flat bottom to them, depending on the direction you're looking at them. So I like to usually kind of hint to that on at least one of them. And I think I will leave mine here. We want to kind of gently scrub, and depending on your paper, this is going to agitate it, so just be cognizant. And it's not so much a real scrubbing, it's more of a tapping motion, where we're just tapping and pulling out some of that pigment there. Perfect. Thank you so much, Gray Baby. All right, so those are our first two techniques for clouds. We're going to do a bunch more, and I think I'm actually going to add in another color for sky, because we should do some sunset type things, because they're really fun to do. But this one was with a paper towel. We just used the rip side of a paper towel to remove, and then we did the brush technique, where we actually use the brush to lift out the pigment. And you can see, well, I can see, I'm not entirely sure if you'll be able to see this, but I did overwork a few of these areas and I'm starting to get a little pilling. So if you start to get actually that pilling that's on the top of the paper, stop what you're doing and just let it dry and chill out so that we're not going to completely ruin the paper before we move on. I just use masking tape, any old masking tape. Different people seem to have different preferences for it, but I just buy a super cheap masking tape. And there we go. All right, I'm going to grab a couple more. And let's do some sunset type things here. We're going to be doing a blue that's going to transition into more of a pink at the bottom so that we can then reflect that in the clouds. So we need to mix up a pink. So in this one here, I'm going to grab some clean water and I'm going to put about a pipette's worth of water in here. And then I am going to add in just some magenta. I'm going to put that on the side. This is the quinacridone magenta. I'm going to wash my brush first because I'm not sure if I still have some blue in there. Then I'm going to grab this quinacridone magenta and put it in this well. And again, we want to use our little tester because this looks super duper pigmented, but it's not going to be quite as pigmented as we think. We don't want this to be, well, I don't want it to be. You might want it to be, but a super in-your-face pink. I want this to kind of just fade and be kind of the hints. I find, at least in Colorado, when clouds reflect the light kind of like this, it's really at the beginning of the sunset, and usually at that point, there aren't the real fiery colors right behind the mountains, at least where I'm at. It usually is more of a nice gentle fade, and so it's a lighter color. So I'm going to be using kind of this nice light magenta pink color. So for these ones, I'm going to be doing a gradient, and I'm actually going to just, to make this easily visible for you guys, I am going to put some just clean water in this bottom well here. So I'm going to be doing a drip line flat wash. Well, it's not a flat wash because it's going to be a gradient. But what I will do is I will put 1 to 2 strokes of the blue. Then I will actually transition for 1 to 2 strokes, depending on how far down these go, with the clear water. And then finally, I will then do the rest with this pink. So that's the general plan. And here it is in action. So I'm going to grab this blue and I'm going to make my first stroke across. And I think I'm going to go straight into the water, and I'm just dipping just the tip in. I don't want to completely replace everything all at once or there will be a harsher line. I want to do this kind of slowly. So I've done 3 with water, 1 with the blue, and now I'm going to start to very gently grab my magenta. And I'm getting a little bit of streaking. Sometimes the colors seem to repel each other, and it can kind of have some neat effects. So we're just going to roll with it. I'm drying my brush off, and now I'm sucking up that excess pigment. And then let's do the brush for this one because I didn't prep my paper towel. I'm going to wash and dry my brush off so it's just damp. And I'm going to start to kind of suck up some of that extra moisture. I'm just going to grab some of that pigment to lift off some of those clouds. And do that a few times. And now, while this is still wet, I'm actually going to touch my brush into my actual pigment and not into my kind of watered down pigment. And while it's still wet, I'm going to just touch this at the base of these. This might be a little bit too dry for this, and so I'm going to quickly wash my brush, make it damp, and then I'm going to just kind of tap that in to encourage that to blend out. This is one you got to work real fast on, and if you start to get these little lines, now that I've added a little bit more water on there, I should be able to grab a little bit more of that straight pigment, and ooh, there we go, and really get that going. Mine looks a little too regular for me here, so I've washed my brush and I've got it damp again. And I'm just going to kind of encourage these to flow together a little bit more. And then at this point, I can lift even more if I need to with my damp brush. And this one might need a second layer. I'm starting to feel like I'm overworking this one, so let's actually just let that one be and sit. And let's do the same technique, but let's see it with the paper towel. So I'm gonna prep my paper towel here. Again, if you are joining now, to lift these clouds, I take a paper towel and I kind of crumple it up and then tear it so I get a natural ripped edge to it. I'm going to do a similar gradient to the one above, so I'm going blue to clear to pink. And I'm going to try to work a little faster on this one. I'm going to do 2 of the blue, then go into the clear water for 2. Actually, I'm going to do 3. I'm just trying to get this not super blue so that it won't be just purple. It's going to be more pink. Ooh, see that wave of that magenta go across that? I've been trying to figure out what that's called when paint does that, and I cannot figure it out. All right, I've got probably too much water going on there, but that's okay because I'm going to disguise it with some clouds. So I'm going to take the ripped edge of this and I'm going to start to lift out some clouds here. Mine's getting saturated, so I'm going to rip off a layer. There. And then I'm going to start, because I've dried that out a little bit too much, by tapping in just some of the magenta pigment on top of here. And then I'm going to wash my brush, dry it so it's damp, and I'm going to kind of smooth out those edges of what I added before tapping into the straight quinacridone magenta pigment right along the bottoms of these, where I made sure it was nice and wet to kind of, oops, not there, that's not it. All right, let's try to fix that. Just added some water there. And then we can go back in with our paper towel while this is still wet and tap out some more of that pigment. And there. Once I add my mountains there, I think that's going to look like really beautifully reflecting sunset clouds. I think that same dog hair is trying to stick to this one. All right, I'm going to set these aside. So the way that I work on my skies is we're going to work in layers. I'm going to do a few more, and then we're going to reevaluate all of them in order to see if we want to add another layer, if we want to adjust it, or if we're happy with what we have. All right, I want to show you kind of a fun way to do a rainy type day. So for this, I want to, I'm going to mix up a new color. That's going to be kind of a gray blue, thinking real just overcast, dark skies day, because there's a really fun way to make it look like it's raining. So let's actually mix that color up. I'm just going to take some clean water, put it in my well. And I don't think I'm going to add that cerulean because it's got a little bit too much bright liveliness to it. I think I'm going to stick with my Prussian blue. And again, I'm going to grab one of my tester strips just to kind of figure out where I'm at. That's way too light. I'm going to grab more blue. And I'm probably going to need even more. I also want this to have like maybe a slight purple feel to it, so I'm going to grab some of that magenta. Not a ton, but just a little bit. So I've got Prussian blue and magenta blue here to make that. And then I'm going to add in just a little bit of that orange to really mute all those colors together. Because I want this to be kind of a gray day. Oh good, I'm glad. So that might work. I kind of want it, I think I'm going to start with it a little bit darker. I'm going to add a little bit more of all of those pigments in to make this just a little bit darker. And then if it doesn't work how I want it to, we can lighten it for the other paintings. But let's add in a little bit more of all three of those just to make this pigment a little bit more saturated, or this color a little more saturated. Again, Prussian blue, magenta, and orange. Gotta go to the back, there's too much oil there. I think that's probably going to be a better saturation level. All right, so we need to prep for this one too. Make sure you've got some paper towel with some rough edges. This is some of my scraps for my other one. And I might, just to make sure I'm prepped, take one of my old ones as well and rip off just that layer that's saturated. I like to try to use as much of the paper towels I grab as possible. All right, so we're going to do a flat wash again with a similar technique. And we're going to want to move quickly, and we're going to be lifting using our paper towels, and I will demonstrate all of that. One other thing is when you mix up a color with a whole bunch of colors and it sits, this hasn't really sat that long, but just as a good practice, it's always good to make sure before you actually start again, just to go in here and give it a good mix so that none of those colors have kind of separated or settled, because some of them have different densities and sometimes they settle out or raise to the top. going to grab this pigment, and then I'm going to do a flat wash across this. Adding little bits at a time, and then just pulling this all the way down. If you get towards the bottom and you've got a good drip line, you won't need to actually continue that. Suck up that extra water. And then what we're going to do is we're going to tap and then drag. And we want to make sure we've got quite a few of these ready. Tap and drag. And we're going to basically give the indication that it's raining. Exactly, certain colors settle to the bottom. We're just adding some motion here. Now I want this to be a little lighter here. So I'm going to wash and dry my brush so it's damp. And I'm going to be encouraging some of those colors to come out. Oh, I'm getting a really interesting effect here where my magenta is actually kind of stained the page behind it. That's kind of pretty. That was unintentional, but it's kind of pretty. And we just keep doing this until we're happy with how it looks. There we go. I think that's as much as I'm going to be able to get out of that now that that's starting to dry. I think I do want to adjust that color. I like how that kind of came out, but I don't know. I think we can do better with the color. So I'm going to use the same color, but I'm just going to adjust it. And I'm actually going to take, I don't usually use Payne's Gray, but I want it to be less warm. So I think I'm actually going to try to just put some Payne's Gray in there if I can find it, or black. Here, this one's black. I wonder if this is too dried to use though. Yep, it's too dry. All right, we might have to make our own black if I don't have my other Payne's Gray in here. Or actually, I can just grab, I've got my dry set, since I don't need too much of it. So I'm just going to wet my Payne's Gray, and my palette is not set up in a way that makes a lot of sense. I just put them in there. But I'm just going to grab a little bit of that Payne's Gray and mix that into this color just to quickly change this to more of a gray. And my Payne's Gray is kind of a cooler type color. I'm going to need a little bit more. So it'll kind of help counteract some of those magenta vibes I was getting from that. So here we go. Yes, I think that's going to be a little better. Let's wait and see how this dries, because you can see this is the sample from before. And a little bit of that magenta is peeking out. Let's see if we were able to counteract that as it dries. Hello? Here I can actually kind of check by lifting. There's a little bit of that, but not as much. I think it's going to be better. I probably should wait, but I'm feeling impatient, so. This might be a good learning opportunity to see what not to do. All right, we're going to basically do the same thing again. I'm going to get some more paper towels, and as you saw, it was kind of crucial to have a couple of these ready to go, so let's go ahead and have a few ready to grab. So I'm just doing a flat wash with my kind of steel blue or grayish type color. And I'm going to just bring that all the way down. We want to make sure that we really work pretty quickly here. So again, it's fill, tap, and swoop. I'm going to grab a different one that's dry, tap, and swoop to get those colors to kind of like it's raining. Oops, I went down onto this other one. There we go. This one I feel like is actually looking a lot more like that kind of cloudy, rainy day that I was hoping for. Okay, so I have gotten some pigment on here. We're going to be able to see that through, so be careful. But on this last one here for the clouds that I want to do, that I have planned, if we've got time at the end, we might be able to do some more, but we do need to do some evaluating after this one. But this last one here, we're not going to do a straight flat wash. We're going to be being intentionally haphazard about the way we do this. So make sure you have your blue and some water. I know this looks like it's got a lot of blue in it, but it's pretty much clear, and that will work. And we're going to kind of be preserving the white space of certain areas so that if we want to add teeny bits of this yellow ochre, we can. So you might want to put a little yellow ochre right on your palette just to be prepared in case we want to do this. Oh, of course. Oh, that's exciting. You're going to do a plein air class? Nice. Is it with watercolor or is it with oil or acrylic? All right, so you might want to watch how I'm going to do this. I don't typically sketch these out because I don't like to have any pencil marks or anything, although you can use a watercolor pencil to kind of define where these are going to be, but I like to kind of just do what the watercolor is giving me. Feel free to, if you need to sketch these out, go ahead and do it. But in general, what I'm going to be doing is, in my mind, there is going to be at least one big cloud kind of up here, and then one kind of coming down in this area. So what that means for this technique is that I'm going to grab some of this blue, and then in the areas where I know there aren't going to be clouds, I'm going to put that blue here and work really quickly. While everything is still wet, I'm grabbing more of that just clear water, and I'm just kind of filling in the gaps where I know that I want to, well, I've changed it obviously a little bit. I'm going to clean off my brush and kind of let that fade out in between those different areas. Because what I'm trying to do is preserve some white space where it's going to be okay for me to add a little bit of yellow without it just completely mixing into the green. So we've got, I basically added the blue here, and then I just kind of faded it out into these different directions. Now I'm going to add an additional buffer between where I'm adding the yellow and the blue because I don't want the green in the sky, and I'm going to, while this is still wet, I'm going to drop in a little of this magenta kind of along the base of where these are, because the magenta and the yellow will make a little more orange, and if they mix with the blue, it'll make more of kind of a gray type color, and that's okay. I'm all right with that color, but I don't want green. Artist choice. Oh, that's cool. You're going to use watercolors. So fun. This is a Paul Richardson hardboard that you can technically paint on, but I mainly just use it for this. All right, so really quick before this gets too dry, I'm going to tap some water on my brush, and I'm going to grab just a little bit of this yellow ochre, and I'm going to tap that right kind of along at the top of where I added that pink type color. And you see I'm kind of tilting my board to control which direction this is flowing, washing my brush, and I'm going to just grab a little bit of that yellow just to make sure it's not going to go into the blue where I don't want it to go. And of course, I'm pretty sure this is that same Dog hair. Oh my gosh. All right, I'm just going to have to leave it to dry in there. I don't like how this line is here, so I'm just going to kind of lift some of that out too. Maybe even go in with a little bit of my paper towel to kind of roughen up some of those edges. This is really just kind of working how you want to work and just going with the flow on this one, but it's a good way to kind of add in some of that yellow without getting it to just be green because you're adding it to a blue background. All right, so we've done all the clouds I had planned on, but what I'm going to do next, oh no, actually we didn't do all the clouds I planned on, so hopefully we'll have time to do one more that's kind of fun. But what I want to do before we move on too far, because I've done 7 paintings here, is evaluate these. So since I've been working on a bunch of these have had time to dry, and if I wanted to add a second layer on top of these without kind of disturbing the under layer, I could do that at this point. So I want to look at these to see if I like what's happening. So the brush I'm using, by the way, is it's a round brush, size 10, and it's a Dynasty one. I ordered this from Blick. And if I remember right, I think it was about $7. I'm not responsible enough to own expensive brushes, so that's about as expensive as I get for brushes. So we want to just evaluate these before we go on to adding any final details or figuring out if we want to add another layer. In general, I really like the clouds I did on this one. I don't think I want to mess with those ones. These ones I like, but I feel like they could be a little better. So I'm going to add a second layer on this. Now, my thinking on this is a few things. One, I do want to preserve some of these nice light areas. So I might actually pre-wet those light areas before with just fresh water before I do my same flat wash over it, because it'll naturally dilute it in those areas. And then I will do some more lifting with my brush. I want to keep this to the brush technique only, just so that we can see what can be achieved with that on this one. And that's my general plan. So the first thing I'm going to do is wash my brush. And then I'm going to take just some of that clear water and I'm going to put it right over those light areas that I think I don't want to have darkened a whole bunch to kind of protect them. And as you can see, if I kind of shine it in the light, I don't know if you're getting a good reflection or not, but it should be kind of shiny in those areas. And then I'm going to do a flat wash over this. So I'm going to grab, this is my original blue we used. And I'm going to do the same thing. I think at kind of bumping up the contrast is going to help this. And it's naturally going to have a little bit of gradient because of that water I added there. And then we want to work, oh, we're doing this with the brush, that's right. So wash my brush, dry it, and then I can lift from those areas again. And this will be a little bit darker in some of those areas, but it's at least helped a little bit. Oh, I think I'm getting some overworking, so I am actually not going to do this with the brush anymore. I'm just going to use my paper towel. I wanted to keep this as one, but I don't know how much you can see, but it is getting really overworked from the brush. So I'm going to drop in a little extra water here. And we're going to use the paper towel. The paper towel is so much gentler on the paper that you can do a lot more working with it than you can with the brush and kind of scrubbing. I am adding the water using the brush, but to actually pick it up, I'm going to be using the paper towel now at this point because I don't want to continue it being, ruining it. And then one thing we can do while this is still wet, if you wanted to emphasize the bottom of these to kind of be like the bottoms of thunderheads, is I can take that gray color and just touch along the bottoms of these kind of show that there is a base to these, and maybe I'll tap it around in a few areas to give them a little more dimension. It's about kind of doing what the painting is telling you to do. All right, in general, I think I'm going to be happier with this one when it dries, but we're going to have to wait and see. I'm going to grab a little bit more of that gray and just re-emphasize that just a little bit more. I think that, yeah, this one will be much better once it dries. All right, now we need to go on to these. This one I already knew I was probably going to do another layer on. I'm not super happy with that one. I might need to just lean into doing some real wild colors. So what I'm going to do on this is make sure I have some of my magenta here, and maybe even some of this yellow ochre just ready to go. I'm going to wash my brush off, and I'm going to do a full wash just using just clean water. So I just have my little thing of water here. And I'm going to wash this all with water and let this kind of soak in just a little bit, because I'm going to go in with some of those real bright colors, but I want them to all bleed together nicely. So as we can see here, I still have a little bit too much shiny. We want this to be wet where you can really see the texture of the paper. So in some areas you can tell you can't see the texture very well. So I want to wait for just a minute before I get too impatient and start adding water in so that I get the effects that I actually want, which will let it kind of spread in a way that I control rather than it just all dripping straight down. And over here it's ready to go, but it's still not ready to go here. So I'm going to just tap a little bit more water over here in order to kind of make this all